When we're young, we have an amazing, positive outlook about how great life is going to be, but somewhere along the line, we forget to dream and end up settling. Join.Dots features amazing people who refuse to give up and chose to go after their dreams. This is your blueprint for greatness. So here's your host, live from the back of his garden in the UK, David Ralph.
Good morning, everybody. How are you all? Welcome to episode 75 of Join.Dots. In the introduction, it says, amazing people who went after their dreams. Now, it's a bit of a different conversation that we're going to have today because the guest is not somebody that I think has had the dream all their life, but it's certainly a vision that they have created. Hopefully that'll make a bit more sense as we actually go into the conversation. It is going to be quite a difficult conversation. As I say, most of the episodes of Join.Dots are quite light and breezy. We'll hopefully keep it that way, but you'll understand why I'm saying that again. There is a kind of darkness to the content which we will be touching on. So today's guest is a father who has faced the most difficult of times and in the process started changing the world. As an accomplished businessman, author and motivational speaker, he was a man in control. He coached groups of people, large and small, to help them overcome the challenges that can derail all of us in our professional lives. He helped increase revenue, he developed leaders and improved teamwork, and in short, life was good. But little did he know, however, that whilst this side of his life was firing on all cylinders, his son's life was on a path that no parent would want them to be on. Discovering his son was taking heroin, living homeless, and devoid of positivity in his life, our guest had a choice to make, and in fact he really had no choice. He turned his life both personally and professionally on its head to face his son's problems head on and provide the love and support that a father only knows. And that was just the beginning of the tale. A story with many twists and turns, successes and failures, and an unusual mode of transport which you wouldn't expect to be part of the salvation of this father and son couple. So let's bring onto the show, to start joining up dots, the one and only Mr. Dave Cooke. How are you today, Dave?
I'm wonderful. Wonderful.
Are you wonderful? Because there is a lot of darkness in that introduction. And I'll be honest, this is episode 75. And I think it's the most difficult introduction that I've had to write.
Well, listening to the introduction kind of reminded me of the celebration of the life that I'm living. I had a gentleman several weeks ago respond to some things that I posted on the internet. Says, you don't look like a father whose life has been ruined by his son's addiction. And I took that as the greatest compliment, not the greatest criticism. Certainly what my son went through and is going through with his addiction is a very challenging, very adverse, very painful thing for me. However, it doesn't define me as a dad, and it doesn't define my life. It's just something in my life that I need to deal with, as we do with any adversity or difficulty.
So I was going to come up with this question later on, but I think I'm going to go with it straight away. Although a terrible, terrible thing that you have been through, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, is there a lightness to the fact that you have gone through that? Is your life in a better place than perhaps it could have been without it?
It certainly challenged me to examine everything that I was doing in my life. Whenever something like this goes on, and every parent who's dealing with a child who's in trouble, whether it's with the law or with addiction, looks at themselves and says, how does this reflect on me as a parent? Have I failed my son as a parent? And so I definitely went through that process where I challenged myself and says, okay, Dave, who are you as a dad? And who are you as a man? And even then the further conversation, who are you as a husband, made me look at everything in my life in a different light, saying, what are you doing now, and what can you do differently, and what can you do better? As a result of that internal conversation, absolutely, I'm a better, different person for the process and the experience.
So let's go back in time and let's start joining up the dots, which is the theme of the whole show. So you were very successful. You were a man in control. You were somebody that would go into organizations and help them with their challenges and help them with their obstacles. And you could see things that needed mending. Was that part of the issue? Were you so focused on your business life that your son kind of slipped through the cracks somewhat?
I'm not really sure that I would say that I was so focused on my business that my son's life slipped through the cracks, because I was one of those dads who was certainly a very involved, very engaged, and very active person. I coached, the basketball teams. I coached the soccer teams. I coached my daughter in her softball. I was definitely committed to being an active and involved dad. Um, Notwithstanding, there certainly was. I was definitely at that point in my life when my son was probably 19 or 20 years old, of the mindset that, hey, he's a young man, he's an adult, and his need for fatherly advice and guidance and instruction isn't as great. So I certainly was focused on what I would call the next chapter in my life, which is pre-retirement. How do I make as much money as I can and grow my business as fast as I can, so that at some point in my life I can retire and do some of the other things that I want to do in my life.
Which is totally understandable, and I think we would all be exactly the same. I'm 44 years old. How old are you, David?
I'm 57.
You're 57, so you've got a few years ahead of me. But even at my stage now, I'm thinking to myself, look, I'm not planning to work till I'm 65. I need to crack on and make the most of it as I possibly can at this age. So was it always a fault of yourself at that time that you only had a certain shelf life of income producing time before you were sort of settling down?
Oh, definitely. You get to that point, and thinking back on my career, when we're first out of college, and listening to your introduction and some of the things that we talked about, pre event, we spend our lives planning our career, and our career says, okay, I've got to pay some dues, and I've got to invest some time, effort, and energy doing menial stuff, but eventually I'm going to get to the point where I'm at the top of the pyramid. And when I get to the top of the pyramid, the problem with being at the top is the next step is you start sliding down. There's only so much. Who's going to want a 65 or 70-year-old dude walking around their business, coaching and then advising them? They're going to be looking for the next, young, innovative mind. And so I do have a shelf life. And so I was making sure I'm at that place now where I'm at my greatest value, most experienced, most wise, most seasoned. I gotta mint some money now, without a doubt.
Did you think the companies are looking for the next young dude? Is experience not the key thing? You've been there, you've seen it, you've done it. You've seen businesses come and go. You've seen economies come and go. Isn't that more important than some whippersnapper?
Well, brash certainly isn't sexy. So I don't think they're looking for a whippersnapper. But I do think that people today, it's a double-edged sword. But I think businesses today are looking for innovation and great ideas, but they're not necessarily going to take a risk on something that's not tested or proven. So they're not looking for the youngest guy with the greatest idea or youngest person with the greatest ideas, and they're not looking for somebody that's tried, true, and proven and stale, because that doesn't create change. What they want is something in the middle that says, okay, help me feel safe that you're not going to turn my business on its ear overnight, but at the same time, in a very short period of time, you can move this organization into a different direction with tangible, measurable, and sustainable outcomes.
So when your business was going so well, and you were looking at retirement and you were looking at grasping as much money as you possibly could to make your retirement easier, was your son's addiction a bolt out of the blue? Was it something that you just didn't have a clue until there was a knock on the door, or was it something that you was aware of something was going on at that time?
Well, with the benefit of hindsight, the answer is no, but let's tell the story the way it really happened. Yes, it caught me completely by surprise. It was something that I was not aware of. And when I got that phone call that my son was in jail as a result of some indiscretions with the law, I have to say it completely caught me by surprise. I was totally absorbed in the next chapter of my life and never saw that one coming.
Did you accept it, or when somebody phoned through? I imagine, being a parent as I am, my first feelings would be, no, you must have got this wrong. I know my son, he lives with me, you're mistaken.
Well, the thing was he was 19 or 20 years old at the time, so he wasn't living with me. He was living about 2,000 miles away in another state. It caught me by surprise, but I believed it. It just was one of those things. The way the news came from me was from my daughter, who was visiting my son in another city. When she dropped the bomb on me, I took it for what it was, harsh reality. But it was definitely a punch in the gut, and it took me a second to recover from the shock. That's for sure.
So it wasn't the authorities; it was your daughter who phoned up and said, "Dad, your son, my brother, has got a situation here. We need your help."
Yes.
And you flew straight over. You got in a car. How did it work?
Well, because he was so far away and it was the time of day, what I did was I got on the phone, made some plans, and I caught a flight the next morning. The first flight out of town the next morning, and was able to catch up with my son early the next afternoon. So it was about 30 hours elapsed time from when I got the news to the time I was actually able to reconnect with my son and start to help him with this situation.
And what did you do? I don't want to dwell on this too much, but it is a key part of your story because it was so unexpected. So what did you do as a father? Was it a fact that you just thought that, okay, I can financially help him, we'll get you into therapy or whatever, or rehab? Or was there a realization that it wasn't going to be money, it was going to be love and understanding that was the key thing?
Well, I think that my expectations were, and this is, and you are correct, this is a key part of this story, and this is the key part of my journey as it relates to other parents in similar journeys, is like everything that we've done with our child, whether he's 20 or he's 2 years old, my perspective is that as a parent, it's my job to jump in and fix this, find out what I need to do to help him, love him, coach him, encourage him if I needed to financially support him, whatever it was. My job as dad was, when I got off that plane, was to find my son, tell him I loved him, and roll up my sleeve and figure out how we're going to solve this problem, how we're going to fix it.
And did he want that? Did he want you to be suddenly in his life? Obviously, being 2,000 miles away, there was a certain amount of independence and freedom. And for any child growing up, there does come a time when deep down you want your parents, but you also don't want your parents' disapproval. Would he have been happier that you wasn't involved in it?
That's a great question, to which I probably never asked him. I think some of the things, again, at the benefit of hindsight, I think some of the things that we did to rescue my son, he resented and didn't appreciate at the time. Notably, at the end of this cycle of, when I first started helping him, about 3 or 4 months later, I ended up moving him from Detroit, Michigan, which is where he was living, to Arizona. He, to this day, probably doesn't like or appreciate the decision, but at the same time, he knows it was in his best interest and doesn't resent us for doing it. But he wasn't happy with some of the things that I did. But I will tell you, when I saw him and reconnected with him that very first day, he was surprised at how fast his dad showed up. And I think that did instill in him something that reminded him that no matter what happens in his life, his dad, his mom, we love him. And I think that was a powerful message in the process.
I'll be honest with you, David, that actually choked me up when you were saying that then, because, I'm a father of 5 and I would jump through hoops like all parents would. But the fact that your son was surprised that you would do that, I found that quite emotional and shocking. I'll be honest with you. I found it shocking that he would think that. I've only been connected with you for 15 minutes, but you seem a genuine, honest, you sound a great guy. You're coaching Little League, you're doing all those kind of parental responsibilities. And the fact that your son went, hang on, you came all this way for me? That must have been quite hurtful to you, was it?
Well, it was surprising to me, but I think that when I put everything into context, here's a kid who, for the better part of the last 9 months, the previous 9 months of his life, had been in and out of jail a couple times. Now, I didn't know that story. He had quit school. I knew that part of his story. He was living on the street. The way he was viewing his life, that his life was pretty much in a really bad spot, that all was ruined. He had lost hope for his own life. And I think when he ended up in jail, the last thing that he expected to see when he came out of jail was his dad standing there saying, "I'm here to help you." I think that he had given up on his life. And I think that that was the piece that struck him, is that I can't believe my dad's here already. Wow. He must really love me. And I think that he had given up on his life, and he was shocked that somebody else hadn't.
Were you surprised that you loved him so much? And I don't mean that as a stupid statement to make. It may sound a stupid statement, but I know with myself and my kids, when they're really small, it's all hugs and cuddles and kisses and all that kind of stuff. And then they hit their kind of teen years, and they do sort of pull away from you. And you almost lose that kind of physical connection that you have with them at a very early age. And you kind of perceive them as not wanting you as much. You perceive them as being individuals that you're actually helping them by allowing them to take responsibility for their own life and their actions. So when you had that phone call, was it like a stranger? You were going to a stranger. Did you feel that love that you might have had when he was a little lad running around the backyard?
Definitely. I think that's what was the shock piece to me, is that you're at that place, and I think you hit it on the head. As I remember the thought when I'm lugging kids to soccer practice and softball practice and all this stuff, going, boy, I can't wait till these days when all this chaos is over and I can just enjoy my life and maybe check in on my kids wherever they are. And then all of a sudden the house is empty and you're missing your kids. And then you get this phone call that your son's in jail, and you go all the way back in time and think, I can't believe that this little guy, and I'm envisioning, I know he's 20 years old or 19 years old, but I'm envisioning him at 8 years old, this kid that you did hug and cuddle with and laugh and joke with. And I'm thinking, that's the guy, that's the kid that's in jail. So I reconnected with old dad and young boy. And it did surprise me. And we've talked about this. I've talked about this with other people, because I look at this and they say, I'm really surprised that I'm so modest about the actions that I took. Because I said, this is what every parent would do. They go, not every parent could do it. You did just that unconditional, unequivocal, just dive in deep kind of love stuff. But that's when you realize how much you love your kids, is when they need you the most. And it doesn't matter whether they're 40 or they're 8. You're always going to love your kids, and they're always going to have that piece of your heart. It's just that you manage it differently at a different place in your life.
It is a shame, or maybe it's just natural that happens, isn't it? Because it's so precious when they are young and you're lifting them out of the bath, wrapping them in a towel and all that kind of stuff. And it is a pain as well. There's many times when they're small that you kind of think, oh, just give me 5 minutes. But it is a love, isn't it? It's a love that you can't almost express into words until, I suppose, they leave, and then you get grandchildren. I suppose that's how it works. And then you suddenly have this opportunity to reconnect with the little emotional side that you'd lost.
Right. Well, I shared this with my, my older son. The son we're talking about has 2 siblings, an older sister and an older brother. And I remember, as long ago as 10 years ago, when I was visiting my oldest son, who's a very accomplished businessman. He's got a PhD at a very prestigious university. And I was talking while he was getting his PhD work. And I said, I worry about you every day. He said, no way, Dad. I said, I shouldn't say worry like fret, but every day there's a time in my life, my day, where I pause and I say, I wonder how you're doing. And he says, you're crazy. I said, nope, it happens all the time. I said, that's the job of a parent. Parents' connection to their kids will never, ever end. It just isn't as demonstrative, like you said, as those early days where you're, taking care of them and you're nurturing them, teaching them mannered and helping them with their homework or taking them to soccer practice. Those are the days where they're most dependent upon you. And when they're 25 or 30, they're not dependent upon you. But that doesn't mean that they're not a part of your life or attached to your heart. It never ends. It never goes away.
It doesn't go away. And all you listeners out there on your way to work, and you might be 35 or whatever, when you get to work, just contact your mum and say you love her. A shocker, because you probably haven't said it for the last 15, 20 years. But it's what we should all do, shouldn't we? We should connect with the people who love us most, because we don't.
Right. But be careful when you call your mom to tell her you love her. The first thing you say is, everything's okay. I'm just calling to say I love you, because she's going to get the call that she wasn't expecting, and she's going to panic that something's wrong. So start with, everything's okay. I just wanted to call and say I love you.
Words of advice. Big advice. So you're in, where was he? 2,000 miles away from you? In Detroit, wasn't it?
It was with Detroit, Michigan, yes.
Okay, so you've flown to Detroit. You get him out of jail. Was that where he was when the call came through to you?
Oh, well, the call, yeah, he was in jail when my daughter called me, yes.
Okay. So what was the first things that you did with your son? I can't imagine that you sat down in, Starbucks and just had a cup of coffee. How did you start to sort of reconnect with him?
Well, it was interesting because I was able to, I called up a friend and told him that I needed a place to stay, and I was bringing my son. And so I basically convened in somebody's living room and just sat with my son. And the first thing I just said to him, I said, tell me what I need to know. I'm here to help you. Tell me what I need to know. And he just shared with me bits and pieces of his story. I would quite honestly know that he didn't tell me the whole story, but he told me enough to be dangerous. And then I told him, sat down with him, and we did, a friend of mine gave us tickets for a sporting event and says, what you guys need to do is just go out and have some fun and reconnect. And that's what we did. And then the next day we got up and we went to meet with a good friend who's an attorney, and we started going through the process of what do we need to do legally to start to understand and deal with the problem.
So why did you do that, David? The legal aspect? Because in my head it would be, straight into rehab or something, help with the addiction. Why did the legal aspect take precedence?
Oh, well, because my objective, the way I looked at the big picture is that, and not this is the lesson of addiction, my journey of the learning about addiction, is that I believed that all my son needed to get out from under his trouble was the love, coach, and encouragement of his parents and his family, a change of venue, that kind of thing. So my goal in life was the rehab could occur, but it needed to occur somewhere else. It needed to occur in an environment that was closer to the people who knew him and loved him the most, and that wasn't Detroit, that was Arizona, where I was living. So my quest was using the legal system to find out what I could do to get him out of Detroit and into Phoenix.
Why? I don't understand that. Can't you just take him? Is there legal aspects to that? Why couldn't you just sort of fly him over to Arizona?
Because he was arrested for a couple of crimes in Detroit, and he had already been sentenced and assigned probationary responsibilities in Detroit. So his probation officer would have to release him to go complete his probation in Arizona and have it supervised, basically self-supervised probation.
Okay.
So that's why I went to the lawyer, and the lawyer says, yeah, you got to find out the nature of the terms. And I went to the probation officer, and the probation officer then said, well, it's not going to be that simple. And it was all jurisdictional legal mumbo jumbo. But at the end of the day, that's what I was able to do. But it took me more than one trip. It took me several months worth of maneuvering before I was able to get him transferred to a new location and a new venue here in Arizona.
Right. Okay. Let's take the story away from your son for a while, because the interesting part is how you've taken this onto such a scale and helping so many people. So you had your son, you've moved him back. Things are now going well, and he's sort of being weaned off his addiction. When did the idea?
Well, if that was only the truth, but anyway, that's really not the story.
To tell us a story, then. Sorry.
I'll tell you the story real quick, because I think that's what you're going to ask the question. I'm going to kind of preempt your question so that you can ask it again. But when the change in venue didn't do him any good, and this is the lesson of being a parent with a child with an addiction. And we're not going to spend any more time on that, except that I learned over the next 18 months that me wanting my son to be clean and to embrace recovery, all the love, coach, encouragement, change of venue, all that stuff will not change the outcome in my son's life unless my son decided that he wanted to embrace recovery. He didn't embrace recovery. So we spent about 18 months living and experiencing in Arizona what he was doing in Michigan. He got in trouble with the law. He spent time in jail. We went to more courts. We went through all that stuff. So for about 18 months, I rode his roller coaster of life choices and decisions related to his addiction. So to answer the question that I preempted, when did I decide to take my journey to a different level? Is there was a point in my life where I realized that his addiction had become my addiction, and that my life was being ruined in my quest to save him.
So was it a dawning realization, or were you laying in bed one morning and you suddenly thought, I know what I've got to do here. This is bigger than just him and me?
Oh, it was a dawning realization. I had one. It was the best way to describe it is one night I woke up in the middle of the night and my son was missing. He had stolen my TV set and he was somewhere on the street. And I woke up in the middle of the night that night and just kind of had that realization that my life was completely spiraling out of control. And I literally sat on the front porch of my house and said, man, what are you going to do to change your life? Because this is not the way you need to live your life. Your health is in bad shape. I had allowed my business to fall apart. My relationships were struggling. I was so obsessed with saving my son that everything else was put on hold, to the point where everything else had eroded and collapsed. And when I finally had that moment of realization, that's when I said, you have got to get control of your life and do something different, because this isn't working. And that's where the journey of my bicycle ride started, is that I made a commitment to myself that I was going to ride my bike for at least an hour a day for the next 100 days. The reason I was riding my bike was not for the physical benefit, which was obviously a bonus, but the reason I really chose to ride my bike is that I knew if I started my day with a productive, positive workout, the rest of the day would fall into place in a much better way. And so I just tasked myself with doing something that the mantra was, what can I do to create an environment for myself where I'm strong for my son when he's present, but I'm even stronger for myself when he's not. And that's what the bike rides were about, was to get focus and clarity and intentionality in my life, despite the choices that my son was doing.
So you really are just setting your day up, and that's all those bike rides are. You know that for that, I don't know how long those journeys were each morning, you had that chance to be on your own, clear your head, and really set yourself on a positive route, really.
Yes, I was like you said, I was framing the day. I was setting the day, and I'll start from something positive and build from there.
Why 100 days then?
Well, there was a back challenge to this. Is that I was thinking from the mind of a person who's dealing with an addiction. Is that the message that we give to addicts is that they have to give something up that they love, no matter at the cost of everything else. And the idea being is you tell them, say, imagine giving up something that you love for the rest of your life. They can't even give it up for 15 minutes, yet we're tasking them with the thought process of giving something up for the rest of their life. And so I was saying, I need to understand what that means to challenge myself to do something that I have no idea how I'm going to do. So I gave myself the task of 100 days, because I didn't know if I could ride my bike every single day for at least 1 hour for 100 days. That sounded like, wow, I don't even know if I can do that. So isn't that what we were asking the addict to do? They go, I don't even know if I can do that. So I said, I'm going to show my son that it's possible, but I'm also going to show myself what it feels like to take on a task like that. So that's why the 100. It was a bit intentional.
Were you kind of unsympathetic? I have a problem. I'm quite unsympathetic to many things because I've never had to go through them myself. And so as people who are heavily overweight, I don't understand it, and people who drink too much, I don't understand it, and because I've never really put myself in that situation, I've always been quite controlled. So on something like addiction, I can't honestly grasp how difficult that is to get off that substance. I know it must be terrible because so many people unfortunately come to a nasty end because of it. But are you more sympathetic now than at the beginning? Did you simply think that there was a process to sorting people out and then you could just move on to a happy life?
Oh, definitely. by nature of my personality and by the nature of just my professional career is that I was always very goal oriented, results oriented, and it was about a matter of mindset. You put your mind to something and you do it. And I really struggled to comprehend this notion of powerless, which is what the people in AA talk about, or the notion of the disease being, clouding your mind and stuff like that. It's like, it was a concept that I'm not sure that I was unsympathetic, but I certainly was not knowledgeable enough to understand the concept, the notion that that's possible. Because it's just like, I thought, yeah, you put your mind to something, you do it. So you decide you're not going to do drugs, you don't do drugs anymore. You figure it out. And there are still elements of that whole conversation that I do think that a lot of the things that we do in our life are a product of choice. I do think that somebody who's in recovery has chosen that they're not going to use anymore. And if they've chosen that they're not going to use anymore, the notion that they don't use ever again is a matter of how firm they are to that choice and what they're going to do to ensure themselves. The problem is that there is an element to the disease of addiction that clouds their ability at times where they're not as strong as they can be or as they need to be, as opposed to something else. It's not like you and me saying, I'm going to give up cookies. Okay, we are addicted to sugar, but that doesn't mean it's going to kill us, and it doesn't take our brains over to the point where we can't think clearly about not having a cookie. There's a component there that has more force than we realize. And so I struggled learning that, without rambling too much longer, but I did struggle.
No, I think it's a fascinating story because, so many of us are blessed. We go to work, we come home, we pay our bills, and life just floats along, and you don't have the peaks and troughs. You don't have the dark and the light. Or maybe you think you do until you hear stories like this. And it is difficult to get your head around it. It is something, as you say, that for most of us, me included, you haven't got the knowledge to really grasp. I'm listening. I am really listening to what you're saying, because I don't want to come up with just stupid questions afterwards. But there's a lack of understanding, because I've just never known anyone who's been through anything similar to this.
Yeah, when it comes to addiction, Brandon, my son, used to say this a lot, is that you can't make sense out of nonsense. And I think that that's the one thing that we struggle with. We're logic thinking people. And so when we step back and we say, there's got to be a reason, an explanation for the choices and the decisions that you've made, because everything usually has a logical component to it. There is an element to addiction that is just plain nonsensical, and trying to understand or make sense of it will drive you crazy. You just write it off and say, that's that place that I'm never going to understand. It's a world that I don't live in, and I'm going to be grateful that it's not my problem. But at the same time, I'm going to learn not to judge or criticize the person who has that problem. I'm going to do my best to try to understand how I can help them through the process. And, that's about all we can really do. It's about, learning what I can control, learning what I can't control, and focusing on how I can control what I can control.
Do you know, David, around about this time, I normally play the speech by Steve Jobs when he talks about looking back and connecting the dots. And I've been grappling whether I should play it, because it doesn't seem to be relevant to the subject. But I'm going to play it anyway, because I think it's relevant to you as an individual. And so I'm going to play the words of Steve Jobs now, and I'm just going to see your view on these and whether they've had any bearing in your life, or whether life just happens. As John Lennon once said, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. So this is the words of Steve Jobs, and then we're going to talk about it afterwards.
Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever, because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path, and that will make all the difference.
So what do you think about those words? Obviously, your life has been dictated really by choices that you've had to make against choices that you would have wanted to make. So do you think those words are relevant?
Oh, definitely. In fact, actually, I'm glad this was not a videotape because I got tears in my eyes listening to the talk. Um, th- those words are so powerful. I spent my whole career, my entire career has been as a sales guy, whether I was a salesperson or a sales coach or a sales strategist with an organization. And my mission and what made me successful as a sales guy was my ability to help people discover solutions to the challenges and the problems that they faced. And about the time that I was going through the experiences that I was going through, it was interesting, it was slightly before this, but I was losing my passion for my business. Sales wasn't exciting or inspiring or motivating to me anymore. I've been doing it my whole life. I was helping people find solutions to their problems and enabled them to grow their business and make money. And, it was good stuff, but it didn't charge me up much. And now, kind of fast forward to 6 years after the day I got that phone call, and we're sitting here having this conversation. And I can tell you that my mission in life is to help parents work through the adversities that they're going through as it relates to their children's lives. And I couldn't have predicted that my son's adversity would have turned the page for me and stuff like that. But what it did was it helped me recognize and uncover what I was truly passionate about, which was helping people through their toughest challenges. And my son's addiction was the darkest, most painful, worst odyssey of my life. I still struggle with where he's at in his life. But like you asked me earlier on, are you better for it? Yes. It's the greatest gift I've ever been given because it completely transformed my life. And it's enabled me to do things that I would not. It forced me in some respects, but it challenged me to do the things that I wouldn't have had the courage or the guts to do on my own. It pushed me to a different place. And now that I'm here, I'm better for it and I'm happier about it.
How do people out there, how do our listeners who haven't gone to such a dark place, but they've just got the fear of starting something, they've got an idea, they've got a dream, exactly like you've done with 100 Pedals, and you can go onto 100pedals.com and have a look around the site. We're going to talk about it again in a minute. But how do they overcome those fears that root them to the spot when somebody like yourself quite honestly says that without the actual, worst case scenario, you wouldn't have had the courage to take on what you took on?
Well, I think that the thing that I've learned and what's really kept me moving now that I've started doing this and keeps moving me forward is the idea of a good friend author of mine, wrote a book about being bold. And I think that that's really what it is that your gut tells you something. And it says, do this, say this, go here. And so many times we hear it, but then we break it down and we start to analyze it and we start to question it and all that other stuff. And next thing you know, we're not doing it. We've justified inaction. And I think that the key to everything in our life is that we spend more time trying to make sure that we don't make mistakes, that we don't fail, that we don't do something wrong, that we end up don't doing anything. And I think that the be bold methodology is when you hear your gut say, take this step, the next question isn't whether I should or not. It says, okay, here I go. And then after I've done it, what's next? And that's how I've lived the last 6 years of my life. And I can't just tell you how powerful it's been. It's scary. It's uncertain. I've definitely fallen down many times, but boy, I look back in the last 6 years, it's been the best 6 years of my life because I never stopped. I took the next step, always took the next step.
Did you know it was the right next step?
Didn't matter. It was the next step. And that's the challenge in these things. And I think that's the call out. And I think that for me, that's the cryptic message that I hear with Stephen Jobs is that, here we are, we're walking a path and we don't know where it would lead. Only after we've had the opportunity to look back and say, holy crap, look at how this worked out. And we can understand it. We don't know at the right time whether it's the right step. We don't know that it's the wrong step. All we know is it's the step that our gut told us to take. And because it's our gut, that's the step we need to take. It doesn't have to be the right step. It has to be the step.
Everything in my life that has changed in a positive way has been when that scary voice actually made me do something. And that scary voice in my stomach that twists and turns and looks at something that is only going to turn out badly, I now realize is just life's way of routing me to the spot. But actually, if you flip on its head and you listen to that, whenever you get that scary thought, that is the one time that you've got to go, right, I don't care what anything else happens, that is what I've got to do. I've got to do that thing because that is the thing that's going to help me grow. And the only reason I'm scared about it is the fact that I've never done it before.
Right, which is one of my favorite quotes, and I think you asked me that earlier and I didn't share it, but that's my favorite quote is, you never know what you're capable until you put yourself in a position to do something you've never done before.
And it is so simple, that, isn't it? You know, and so many people would go, well, I'm always doing stuff I've never done before, but you're not doing the scary stuff. And all the multi-millionaires, all the, you know, the artists, the film stars, they've all started from nothing. Every single one of us on this planet started as a baby, and you can't get away from that fact. And so the fact that Richard Branson or Donald Trump or Harrison Ford or all these people have got to the position of perceived success is purely down to the actions that they were willing to take.
Right. They did not allow their fears to define the step. They allowed their courage to, you know, to help them take the next step. And I think that that's the difference. And that's a big challenge that we have in our society today, though, because there is so much pressure to be successful. There's so much pressure to do the right thing, and nobody wants to feel like they failed or that they, you know, have fallen behind. But I think, you know, those are the examples that you gave. As you look at these people and you see where they are today, and you want to mimic or imitate their success, but we're mimicking and imitating their success at the high side of the curve, not at the low side of their curve. There was a day where Richard Branson didn't have millions of dollars. All he had was an idea and an airplane, or he don't even know if he had an airplane. But he says, this is what I'm going to do. And he didn't think about where it's going to end up. He says, I'm going to take the next step. I'm going to do this. And I think that that's the power. We have to find a way not to give in to our fears, and we have to be willing to look past some of the risk and be willing just to take that next step and keep moving in a direction that intuitively we know we need to go in.
Because I kind of think the education system is flawed in the fact that our kids, my son is 12, and he's at, well, your high school, our senior school, so 12 to 17. And you can already see the kind of the spark going out of him somewhat, because he doesn't want to step ahead of his peer group. And it's just like a kind of herd of sheep going through school, and no one wants to raise their head too high because, you know, they're going to be the ones that's picked on. So they just get their heads down and pull their shoulders in and sort of migrate through 6 or 7 years. And they come out at the other end, and then what do? They do what everyone else is doing, because they don't want to sort of show themselves as being anything different. And then they move into an insurance job or a bank job or any kind of those things. And I'm trying to say to him now, you know, be creative, because if you can be creative and you can make your own future, then effectively you never have to work again. You will put in the hours and you will work probably harder than you would do in an office, but you've got security and you've got choices, and you might have fun and you might have a life that is your own, and it's your own unique path. And I do think education is flawed, and I don't know the answer. I don't know what we need to do about it, but it does seem to take all the risk-taking out and play safe all the time.
Well, I think that's very true, and we could probably do a whole nother show on that. Is, you know, it starts with a couple of things, but first of all, we're taught at a very early age that the person at the front of the room has all the answers and they're always right. And so our notion of conformity over imagination we squelch imagination very early on, is because there's only one answer, and the teacher has the answer. And so when you think about it, you know, what are we doing 30 years later is that the boss is the boss, and they have control, and we have to adhere to whatever it is they do. So they stifle creativity. And I think you nailed it on the head, is that at a very early age, we have to find ways as parents. Maybe we can't change the school system, but as parents outside the school system, teach our children to dream. And I think that that's so important. And we spend a lot of time talking with parents about that. What is the vision that you have for your own life? Most people struggle with the vision for their own life because they've already stuck in the decay of the conformist society. And that's the power is what do you dream? If you couldn't do what you're doing, what would you do? Or if you didn't have to do what you're doing, what would you do? And it's amazing what people come up with. And I said, why aren't you bringing that into your life? Maybe you have to keep that job at the bank. But because for me, using the bike as my example, I love riding my bike. I could joke with you and say I'm a professional cyclist because every day I'm able to ride my bike as a component of my inspiration for my business. So I'm getting paid to ride my bike. So technically I'm a professional cyclist.
Are you known as the sort of bike guy in Arizona? When you're riding along, do people go, "Oh, there's Dave"?
No, I'm not quite that popular. But there are a lot of people that know that I like to ride my bike, and they're surprised when they find out I'm not like one of those hardcore avid cyclists who are racing on Saturdays. I ride because I enjoy it, and they know that they can always count on me to talk about going. They always know when they see me. Have you gone for a ride today? Yep, I went for a ride today. I love riding. But it's the thing that allows me to celebrate the rest of my life. I make time for myself to celebrate something that gives me energy, because if I don't celebrate that something gives me energy, then what do I have? I just have a dull, non-energized life. And life is long. Everybody says life is short. It's not. I'm 57 years old. I can tell you I've lived a long time. But life goes by quick. And if you're not doing things that you love, you're going to realize that you didn't celebrate the things that you dreamed of celebrating. You squelched them, and I'm not doing that anymore.
Is 100 pedals your dream? I know it's your focus at the moment, but if you had the chance of doing something else, would you still do 100pedals.com?
That's a great question. Yeah. I'd have to say with a caveat. I'd have to clarify that. A couple of things that I'm doing is that I love to be a public speaker. It's been what I've been working on for several years. I have found something that I can be authentically passionate about, that energizes me, that I can give a gift, and it's not, I struggled to be a professional speaker because I thought a professional speaker had to have a big ego and be the guy at the front of the room that awed everybody. And now what I found out is that in the humility of my story of being a dad with a son with an addiction, the things that I've learned, I've found that my transparency and my authenticity and my own relative humility is that I'm a much more powerful speaker as a result of that. And I'm enjoying being the guy at the front of the room that can change lives and inspire people. So I'm doing what I have wanted to do for years. And the fact that I can ride my bike with freedom and flexibility, who wouldn't want to do that every day? In fact, I have CEOs saying, I sure wish I could do what you're doing. And I said, you can, you just won't allow yourself to.
That's a powerful statement, isn't it?
Yeah, well, they don't appreciate it, but because it sounds brash, but it's true, right?
It is. It's absolutely true. I quit my 9-to-5 job, and I think many people thought I was mad. And there were certain points in the process I thought I was mad. And I remember having one night thinking, oh my God, what have I done? I'd now got to, it was that scary time. Even though I'd already I'd already made that leap of faith. There was a point where I suddenly thought, right, I'm going to see if they take me back, and I'm going to see what I can do. But now people are saying to me, this is what you should have always done. And it is strange. Now they can see the success starting to build. They can't see the long hours and the effort and all the other kind of stuff. It is exactly what you're saying. It's that it's the head of the curve that they're looking at. And it's they could do the same, but they're not allowing themselves exactly the same.
And I understand it's difficult because, as you and I both done, and I've done the same thing, I still every once in a while question the wisdom of doing what I'm doing when maybe the cash flow's a little tight, or the phone isn't ringing like I would like it to. Think, boy, it'd be a lot easier just to get a regular everyday paycheck. But then I think about that for about 5 minutes, and I think about what that means. It means I have to be in the office from 9 to 5 or 8 to 5. I'm responsible to somebody else all the time. I'm giving up freedom and flexibility. I'm giving up my creative energy. And the next thing I say, time out. I don't need that. And so I have a little bit less flexibility financially, but I've got 1,000 times more flexibility in the gifts and the energy that I'm getting from what I'm doing. It's worth it.
Just before I put you on the mic, the sermon on the mic, and we send you back in time like a time traveler to have a one-on-one with your younger self, I need to ask, how is your son now?
Well, he rides a bumpy road. He was doing really well for several months, and just as recently as about 2 weeks ago, he had a relapse, and he binged for about a week and a half. And fortunately, it didn't kill him, and it didn't land him in jail, but it did cause him to lose his job, and so he's got a couple things he's starting over again. But thankfully, he's keeps the good fight, and he's here. I mean, there are far too many parents that have buried sons and daughters who died in their relapse. My son's still here. He lives to fight another day, and I'm grateful for it.
I wish him the best. I really do. And I know all our listeners out there will wish him the best as well.
Thank you.
So this is the part, but I'm going to play the tune. And when it fades out, this is your chance to have a one-on-one. And what age of Dave Cooke would you choose? Would it be a real youngster? Would it be a couple of years ago? Would it be the night before you got that fateful phone call? So this is a sermon on the mic.
Here we go with the best bit of the show. The sermon on the mic. The sermon on the mic.
Dave Cooke, this is your past or your future, however you want to look at it. Here you are, 20 years removed. 20 years ago, you graduate from your MBA program and you're looking forward to your career. All I got to do is tell you, dude, don't chase the money. You're sitting right here. I know it. You hated your job. You disliked the people that you were working with, and you thought if you got a degree that you could play a role and grow and do something else, even though you hated the conformity of it. I'm telling you now, my friend, be who you are. Don't try to become something you're not. Embrace the opportunity to be who you want to be. Just step out. Tell people what you stand for. Tell people why you stand for it, and start to help them the way you know you wanted to, instead of trying to figure out a way to make money and change the world that way. You can't change the world from inside the fort. You can only change the world from outside the fort. And I'm telling you, my friend, fight the good fight outside the fort, because people will follow you. There's a lot of people who are looking for answers, and you have them, but you have to have the willingness and the chutzpah to go out and do it on your own and blaze the trail. You can't blaze the trail on a conforming path. You can only blaze a trail on a path that nobody's traveled before. That's my advice to you, my friend. Fight the good fight and mow down a new lawn.
Do you think the young Dave would have listened to that?
If I could give him some of the examples, yeah, he would. Because intuitively, I knew I was unhappy. And I just needed somebody to tell me that I didn't have to do the stuff that I didn't want to do. It's really funny, because about 5 years ago, my wife said to me, she says, she had actually apologized to me, which was, she didn't owe me any apologies, but she says, I realize now that I put pressure on you to do things that made me feel safe in a way that prevented you from doing what you were capable of doing. And, like I said, she didn't need to apologize, but she recognized the difference in the man doing what he loves as opposed to the man doing what he believed he's supposed to be doing. And I think that you can be very accomplished being a man that's doing what they've been called to do, as opposed to doing something that they hate because they feel like they're supposed to.
Dave, it's been an absolute inspiration having you on the show today. It's been a very difficult one, but I've got so much admiration for the way that you've turned your life on its head. You're still helping your son, and obviously you're helping people around the world. So if there are listeners out here that are interested in getting in contact with you, how's the best way of doing it?
The best way is to go to my website, which is 100, the number 100, pedals, like bike pedals, 100pedals.com.
As simple as that. Are you on Twitter? Are you on Facebook?
I'm also on Twitter. You can find me at 100 pedals. You can also find me at Sales Cook. I have 2 Twitter handles. I'm schizophrenic that way. But Sales Cook, which is Cook with an E on Twitter. And you can also find me on Facebook. There's a 100 Pedals page, and there's David Cooke on Facebook. I'm out there. There's a lot of David Cooks, though. You might have trouble finding me that way, but well, I'm everywhere I can be.
Well, I wish you was in more places as well. And so thank you so much for spending time with us today, joining up those dots. And please come back again when you have more dots to join up, or if you just want to tell us how your son's getting on, or if you just want to share. I'm sure that we would love to have you back on the show, because I believe the only way to build our futures is by connecting our pasts. David Cooke, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciated it.
David doesn't want you to become a faded version of the brilliant self you were once to become. So he's put together an amazing guide for you called the 8 Pieces of Advice that every successful entrepreneur practices, including the 2 that changed his life. Head over to joinupdots.com to download this amazing guide for free, and we'll see you tomorrow on Join Up Dots.